You might not be aware, but Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla invented, or tried to invent devices to speak to the dead. Among a lot of things, Thomas Edison was responsible for the first movie camera, first long-lasting light bulb, and Tesla, without him we probably wouldn't have remote controls and wireless radios today. Now, Tesla was born in Croatia. He was a pretty smart cookie. His mum was very smart, and he had a very good education. Tesla lived in New York for 60 years. His laboratory was at 8 West 40th Street. He worked there in 1900 when he was building his Tesla Tower. That was built on Long Island. And something that I did visit when I was in Niagara Falls was the hydroelectric power plant. He designed it. Now, unlike Nikola Tesla, Thomas Edison's education was very different. He did go to school, but unfortunately the teachers were a bit mean to him, and his mother got furious about that, so she pulled him out of school, and basically he was homeschooled. He later on accredited his mother with the fact that he was so successful. He and Tesla had two very different ways of inventing, working. They were very different in their approaches to their scientific research. I'll get to why they were rivals in a second, but I'll let you know, in case you didn't, Tesla actually worked with Edison in Edison's lab, and because they were so different, over the course of time, they ended up sort of rubbing each other the wrong way. Tesla hated the fact that Edison was pretty untidy, and Tesla was really tidy and fastidious, so they just ended up kind of not getting on.
Your lab is so messy, I cannot stand it anymore. Well, Nikola, get out.
So Nikola did leave and started his own lab. Probably one of the best reasons known as to why Tesla and Edison had a huge rivalry going on is what's known as the War of the Currents. Now, I'm not going to go into it and delve into it deeply here. It's reasonably complicated, but the basics is that in the late 1800s, Tesla and Edison both invented a way of powering things. Edison, he liked the DC or direct current. Tesla, he liked the AC or alternating current. And what happened was, while Edison was still fiddling around with his, Tesla was successful in that he sold his patent for the AC generators, etc., to George Westinghouse. Now, George in turn made up some pretty big transformers, etc., and his company basically powered all of New York. Edison was pretty pissed off, and the war started. Long and short is AC took off, DC didn't. So that made Edison a little bit annoyed, and it made Tesla pretty happy. So this is Albert Einstein, you might know him. He was the genius that came up with the theory E equals mc squared, which is basically energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. The other thing he came up with was an idea that fuses 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time into a single 4-dimensional continuum, which is basically the space-time continuum. But I'll let someone else cleverer than me explain it.
Doctor, explain time.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
Einstein theorized energy cannot be destroyed. It either gets turned into something different, takes on a different mass, vice versa. So mass can be turned into energy, energy into mass. Now let me tell you why Tesla invented the spirit radio. One night in his laboratory, Tesla was working on a crystal radio. something that used no power. It uses no power whatsoever. He's working on the radio when he hears something really disturbing come out of it, and it scared the absolute crap out of him. Tesla wrote down in his diary, and this is just a snippet of it, "My first observations positively terrified me. The sounds I am listening to every night at first appear to be human voices conversing back and forth in a language I cannot understand. I find it difficult to imagine that I am actually hearing real voices from people not of this planet. There must be a more simple explanation that has so far eluded me." This is what he heard. So let me just explain the basic premise. Based on what Einstein theorized, as in energy can't die, the premise is that when we die, our energy, our soul, leaves the body, is turned into another energy source, because energy can't die, and that energy source then can transmit sound to a device that can pick it up, i.e. the radio, and we hear words. So now this brings me to Thomas Edison. Thomas had heard about Nikola's invention, and in secret he started to work on one of his own. He called it the spirit phone. In 1920, so remembering Nikola started working on his in 1901, in 1920 Thomas Edison had figured it out, and he invited a whole heap of people to his laboratory to show them his machine and test it. So his device looked like a movie projector. It would shine light on what was known as a photoelectric cell. The idea was that if there was a spirit, a ghost present, and they crossed through that light, his machine would register that they were there, whether he could see them or not, and he had dials and things that would pick up that signal. Because at that time too it was very popular to have seances and the Ouija board and so on and so forth, and mediums were everywhere. So he actually invited a whole heap of mediums, seance people, etc. to the lab. He wanted them to summon spirits, and therefore in his thinking they summon the spirits are there, his machine will pick them up. Unfortunately, I guess no spirits were summoned that night because his machine didn't work. It didn't register anything, which was a bit of a shame for him. He'd probably worked quite hard on it, but it didn't work. So Tesla's spirit radio seemed to work. Was it spirits? Well, we'll never know. And Edison's machine failed. Apparently it said that he did work on it, continually trying to get it to work, but no one's ever found the paperwork or anything else to substantiate that. I wanted to explain to those of you who maybe don't understand the difference between an EVP and an ITC, instrumental transcommunication. That's when you see us using a spirit box or a ghost box, something like that. It's a sound that you hear in real time through a device that's picking up signals.
Good evening, Herman. Grandpa? Good evening, Herman.
Then there's the EVPs, electronic voice phenomenon. Now these are noises that we don't necessarily hear with our ear. Simply put, our ears are just not sensitive enough to pick up on these particular noise wavelengths. So those wavelengths we can't necessarily hear, but our cameras, our phones, our recorders are sensitive enough to pick up the signals we can't hear audibly. Now, an EVP on these devices is very different to a disembodied voice that you can hear with your ears. There's three types, A, B and C. So A is very clear and loud and usually a sentence. B is something that's a bit of a whisper, sometimes a little bit harder to decipher. And C is where it's just a noise and you'd really have to break it down. Can't quite tell what they're saying. So I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. And I really hope you enjoyed this episode on Tesla and Edison. Thanks so much for watching.
Well, boys, that's the end of the lesson. What did you all think? Was it okay?
Yes, why not? Yes, why not?